Boldwood presents Family Ties at the Second Chances Sweet Shop. Written by Hannah Lynn and read by Gloria Sanders. The moral right of the author has been asserted. This performance is owned by Boldwood. Chapter 1. Holly Berry stretched out her arm. She was exceedingly comfortable on the sofa and desperately didn't want to budge. Letting out a long, low groan of disappointment, she accepted that even at full stretch, the bag of clotted cream fudge was just out of reach. "You know you could just stand up and get them," Ben said, lifting his arm from around her waist so she could move. Holly promptly pulled it back again. "But I'm comfy." "So you want me to get them?" "No, you're the reason I'm so comfy," she said, nestling her head against his chest. "If you get up, I might as well do it myself." "Are you going to, then?" She thought about it for a moment. Clotted cream fudge was good, but she could get plenty of that at work. However, this perfect snuggle she found herself in with Ben was just too good to give up. "Probably not," she said. Then, just as she had hoped he would, Ben tilted her head back and planted a kiss firmly on her lips. A long, lingering kiss that caused a warm sensation to flood through her. Yes, this was definitely better than her favourite sweet. Nothing could improve on being tucked away in Ben Thornbury's cosy living room while the rain hammered against the window. Ben Thornbury, local bank manager, avid cyclist, all-round good guy and officially Holly Berry's boyfriend. It had been 3 months since they'd shared their first kiss, on a crisp winter evening, beneath the blinking lights of the Bourton-on-the-Water Christmas tree. It was fair to say their relationship hadn't got off to the smoothest start. Their initial meeting had seen Holly knock him off his bike when she ran blindly into the road as she chased down a group of teenage shoplifters. It was then several months more before they'd considered seeing each other as more than just friends. Then Ben had nearly drowned on one of their first dates, and she could hardly forget the unexpected appearance of her ex-boyfriend, Dan. Fortunately, Dan, along with her old life in London, was firmly in the past, and as the proud owner of Just One More, the quaint village sweet shop that Holly had worked in as a teen, life was feeling pretty good. Even better, now that she and Ben had finally found their rhythm. At one point, she'd thought there was no chance for them, even as friends. But fate intervened, and now here they were 3 months on. February had thawed into March, and the first bluebells were appearing in the woods around the village. And she was spending her Tuesday night with her head resting on Ben's chest, half watching a film, and wondering how the hell she'd got so lucky. His house was basically a mirror image of where she lived, which wasn't surprising given that she was his next-door neighbour in the adjoining semi, which she shared with Jamie, her landlady/new best friend. Since they'd met, she'd been Holly's rock, helping her out of more than one tight situation and offering sound, if occasionally stern, advice. A little spark of guilt formed in Holly as she thought about Jamie. She couldn't remember the last time the two of them had shared breakfast together, or even had a conversation that wasn't just in passing on the doorstep. They still met regularly down at the pub, but always in a group with Ben and Caroline. With the non-stop rain they'd been experiencing for nearly 3 weeks now, they hadn't even done that in a while. The last time they spoke properly, Jamie was about to go on her 3rd date with a guy named Finn, which, for her, constituted a long-term relationship. No doubt it had fallen by the wayside by now, but she really should find out. She'd do it this week without fail, she thought, as she shifted the cushion behind her a fraction. She would make a concerted effort to spend some quality time with her. After all, she needed to do some washing. Spending all her time at Ben's was one thing, but doing her laundry there, well, that still felt like a little too much of a commitment. "Why is she doing that?" Holly asked, her attention suddenly drawn back to the television, where a woman was holding a knife against another woman's throat. The last time she'd looked, the two were laughing in a hot tub together. "What do you mean? Did you not just hear what she said? She confessed to killing Turner." "Who's Turner?" "Have you been paying any attention to this film at all?" "Not really," she admitted. It hadn't been her choice, though, to be fair, it hadn't really been Ben's either. Their tastes in television programmes, films, books, and most other things in life were polar opposites. As such, finding something they could agree on to watch always proved rather difficult. "Do you want me to recap what's happened so far for you?" he asked, running his fingers absent-mindedly up and down her arm. It was a lazy movement that he probably wasn't even aware of, yet it was all Holly could focus on now. "Not really," she said again, arching her back and twisting so that she could kiss him on the lips. "Actually, I can think of a better way to spend our time." "Is that right?" He returned her kiss a little harder, and her pulse kicked up a notch. "Why don't we turn off the television and I'll show you?" It had been so long since she'd been in a new relationship that she'd forgotten how exciting it could be, and how the desire to be with someone so much usually resulted in another one, namely to rip their clothes off. This was another reason they stayed at Ben's. It was true Jamie was out of the house most nights, but the last thing they wanted was for her to feel uncomfortable in her own home with their enthusiastic displays of affection. Holly pushed herself up from the sofa and switched off the television, then reached down and pulled Ben up by the hand. "I thought you didn't want to get up." "I didn't want to get up for the fudge. I own a sweet shop. I can get that any time I want, remember? This, however..." She reached up on her tiptoes and kissed him again. "Has annoyingly limited availability." "Well, when you put it that way." He placed his hands on her hips and pulled her closer. How was it possible she hadn't tired of kissing him yet? And how was it possible that his kisses were just so delicious? Her productivity at work had gone down dramatically since the relationship had started. There was no sorting out the shelves now that Ben came and had his lunch with her upstairs, and her days of staying late to keep on top of the books were over too. The minute his head appeared around the shop door in the evenings, she'd pack up her things and hurry home with him. "We should head upstairs," he said, following the long kiss with a short one. "After you?" Grabbing a piece of fudge and popping it into her mouth, Holly was about to follow Ben up the stairs when her phone buzzed on the arm of the sofa. She glanced down at the screen. "Everything okay?" he called back to her. "Just Mum," she said, rejecting the call. "I'll ring her back later." Now, where were we? No sooner had she taken another step than it buzzed again. Swallowing her annoyance, she took a deep breath. "It could be important," he said. "It's not. It'll be to do with this cardigan she's been knitting me. She's stressing about how many buttons she should put on it. I've told her twice already this week. I really don't mind. I'm not getting into that now. It'll be fine. Trust me." "Only if you're sure?" "I am," she replied. And this time, when she cut the call, she also switched the phone off. Okay, now that I've got your full attention, remind me again what we were about to do. With Ben standing 2 steps above her on the stairs, the height difference between them was ridiculous, and yet as she reached up on her tiptoes to kiss him, she didn't think about it at all. His hands brushed through her hair, a twinkle in his eyes that caused her to flood with heat. "Why do you taste of fudge?" he asked, shifting back and eyeing her suspiciously. "You're imagining things. Now, are you going to sweep me off my feet or not?" "You know what? That sounds like a great idea." Before she could even fathom what was happening, Ben leapt down the steps and swept her up into his arms. "Hey, what are you doing? I was joking. You'll drop me." "Don't you trust me?" "No, I've seen you try to move furniture, remember?" "Are you comparing yourself to a couch?" About 90% certain that he was going to trip and drop her down the stairs, she clutched her arms around his neck and squeezed her eyes shut. And while he managed the first step without whacking her shins, that didn't ease her fear at all. In fact, she was so focused on what she felt was a precarious situation that she barely recognized the sound that cut through her squeals of laughter. "Was that the doorbell?" she asked. "Are you expecting someone?" Ben paused, his laughter still reverberating around them. "I never have visitors, you know that." He tentatively turned on the spot. Holly placed one hand on the banister and one on Ben's shoulder as she got back on her feet. "Maybe it's Jamie," she said. "Well, if it is, we'd better get the wine out," he replied. Holly stayed rooted to the spot. Was it wrong of her not to want to talk to her friend at that precise moment? It wasn't that she didn't want to see her, she did. It was just that moments like this with Ben felt so special, so wonderful, in fact, that at times it seemed impossible that things could stay this good forever. And if that was the case, she wanted to make the most of each and every second. No, she told herself, she was being ridiculous. They were a couple, and a strong one at that. They had a whole future together ahead of them, and the last thing she wanted was for Jamie to feel isolated. "You get the wine, I'll get the door," she said, straightening up her clothes before giving him one last kiss on the lips. As she turned the latch and opened the front door, a cold gust of air blew in from outside, along with a spray of icy rain, stinging her face and causing a sudden burst of blinking. As she tried to wipe the rain out of her face and clear her vision, it took her a moment to see that the person standing there was definitely not Jamie. They were about the same height, but that was where any similarity ended. For starters, he was male, and secondly, he looked to be only about 18 years old. He was wearing an oversized hoodie pulled up over his head, which was soaked all the way through. Wherever this boy had come from, it was a lot further away than next door. Holly looked at him, trying to work out why he seemed somewhat familiar. "Hi," he said, as the rain continued to beat down on him. "Is Ben home?" Chapter 2. Hello?" the young man tried again as Holly continued to stare at him. "I don't mean to sound rude, but are you going to let me in? 'Cause it's pretty wet out here." Before Holly could reply, Ben was behind her, masterfully carrying 3 wine glasses and a full bottle of wine. "Toby, what are you doing standing out there in the rain? Come in, come in." "Holly, this is Toby, my nephew. Toby, this is Holly, my girlfriend." "Hey," Toby said with a nod as he squeezed past her. "Sorry, of course, come on in," Holly said, realizing that she had been studying him with far more curiosity than was probably polite. The minute he stepped in, she saw just how soaked he was. Water was streaming from him onto the mat. She'd never met him before, But it was hardly surprising that she'd felt she recognised him, given that Ben had several pictures of him in the house. That said, it was also understandable that she hadn't actually recognised him either. In one photo, he couldn't have been older than 5, and was sitting on Ben's shoulders as he paddled in the river in Bourton. And in another, he'd been a couple of years older, maybe 7 or 8, and it was a full family photo, with Ben's parents and his sister and his niece too. In that one, Toby had short hair and was wearing a Christmas jumper. Now, his hair was nearly shoulder length, and he was wearing baggy jeans that didn't go all the way up to his waist. "Is one of those for me?" he asked, nodding towards the wine glasses. "Nice try," Ben replied. "Seriously, what are you doing here, and where did you come from? You haven't walked, have you?" "Just from the bus stop." "Why didn't your mum drop you off?" The scoff that followed told Holly 2 very distinct things. Firstly, that Toby and his mum's relationship was not in a good place, and secondly, that he had obviously come here for a reason, to speak to his uncle Ben. Their fervour on the stairs of only moments ago was long forgotten, and it didn't take a rocket scientist to realise that having Toby here meant any chance of romance that night was out the window. Besides, it was obvious the pair needed to talk. "Do you know what?" Holly said, reaching up and grabbing her coat off the hook by the door. "I think I should probably head back to mine and give my mum a ring. She's called a few times this evening and she'll get worried if I don't ring her back soon." "Are you sure?" Ben asked. "Toby, why don't you grab a towel and dry yourself off? You'll find one in the bathroom at the top of the stairs. You know where it is." "Sure," Toby said, not needing to be asked twice and kicking off his shoes. Ben waited until the bathroom door closed before he spoke again. "You don't have to go," he said. "Though this isn't like him, turning up out of the blue. I should probably let him vent." "Honestly, it's no problem at all. I really should call my mum back. Speak later." She reached up and gave him one last kiss. "I tell you what, I'll walk you home." They kissed again on the doorstep of Holly's house, beneath a large golf umbrella with the rain hammering down. This was a ridiculous habit they'd got into, walking each other home, which actually meant stepping a full 2 feet out of one door to the next. But Holly loved it. Not that she actually went home that often. It always made her smile, and a warmth would spread through her knowing she had someone who would do the little things for her that meant so much. That was what really counted. She had learned the hard way that relationships weren't about big gestures or grandiose promises, which was probably just as well, as she and Ben pretty much never discussed the future. While they talked about weekend plans and possibly going to see a new release at the cinema, that was as far ahead as they ever looked. She had vaguely broached the subject of buying a joint present for Jamie's birthday, but Ben had mumbled awkwardly something about a tradition, and Holly hadn't wanted to push it. She knew from Jamie that he'd been badly hurt in a previous relationship, and it wasn't like they needed to rush things. Maybe, in a couple of months, they would start thinking further ahead. Perhaps plan a holiday together, that type of thing. But for now, she was perfectly happy living in the moment. And the moments were good. "See you tomorrow," Ben said. "And tell Jamie to stop sending me reminders about her birthday. I've known her for nearly a decade, so I'm well aware what the date is." "I'll let her know," she said, giving him one more kiss before slipping inside the house and shutting the door behind her. Holly had noticed Jamie's van parked on the driveway, but when she called her name there was no reply. The light on the landing was on, and so was the one in the kitchen, but that didn't mean that she was in. Leaving lights on was pretty much her only bad habit. And it wasn't like a bit of rain would bother her. She could have easily walked down to one of the pubs in the village or got a lift with someone. Holly was about to go upstairs and check when she remembered the phone calls from her mother and headed for the kitchen. She had grown up in Bourton-on-the-Water with her parents. This was the source of all her childhood memories, from baking with her mum and driving lessons with her dad, to her first job at Just One More, and her first kiss with Jake Johnson. By the time she returned to Bourton, after an extended stint in London, her parents had moved to the nearby village of Northleach. The village was almost as quaint, although it lacked Bourton's distinctive river, which ran alongside the high street. Still, they were closer now than they'd been in years, both in distance and emotionally. Her parents had always been there for her, and the next stage of her relationship with Ben was going to involve introducing him to them. So far, the closest he'd got was waving at them from the car while Holly dropped off some sweets. But good things took time, and she and Ben were a good thing. Perhaps that was why her mum was ringing. After all, Holly had promised last month that she would introduce them. In the kitchen, she picked up a bag of chocolate limes, unwrapped one, and popped it in her mouth. Her mother could talk for hours, and having a boiled sweet to suck on, while umming and eyeing at the appropriate moments, was always helpful. She'd never been a fan of them before, always finding them both simultaneously too tart and too sickly. Given the vast range of sweets that she stocked in the shop, it wasn't surprising that there were some she wasn't keen on. Yet last week, one of her customers had come in and ordered a large bag, and she'd been struck by the desire to try one again, since which she'd been hooked. With the sweet secure in her mouth and another one ready to go, she sat down and called her mum. The phone only rang once before she answered. "Hey, Mum. Everything okay?" "Holly, dear. Thank you for ringing me back, love. I didn't disturb you, did I? You weren't on a date with the bank manager, were you?" "I was at Ben's, but honestly, it's not a problem. We were just watching a film." "Has it finished?" "It was rubbish. And it's fine, we'd already stopped watching it, and then Ben's nephew turned up." "Right. Is everything all right, Mum? You sound odd." Odd was the only word she could think of. Her mum was not a loud person, but so far everything she'd said had been so quiet that Holly could barely hear her. "Oh, Holly." Her voice quavered before the phone line went suspiciously quiet. "Mum, what is it? Are you okay? Is Dad okay? Do you need me to come over? Mum, what's happened? Where's Dad?" Holly could hear the panic in her voice as the worst-case scenarios played out in her mind. She was still struggling to get past the recent loss of Verity, and she had barely even known the woman. The thought that something could have happened to her father was enough to make her blood run cold and heart race simultaneously. "Is he okay?" "Oh, he's fine. It's nothing like that," Wendy said, finally finding her voice. "It's not that bad." A sigh rattled from Holly's lungs. "Then what is it?" she asked, alarm turning to irritation. "What's wrong?" There was a long pause. "He's lost his job. Again," she said finally. Chapter 3. Redundancies had plagued Holly's father throughout her childhood. Sometimes it felt like no sooner had he got a job than he was back out of work again, for no other reason than last in, first out. And while her mum had always worked, picking up cleaning jobs whenever and wherever she could, they were a family who'd been forced to be frugal most of the time. That had been one of the reasons that Holly had been content to stay with Dan, working in a dull but safe job that she despised. Security. The fact that she didn't have to worry about where her next paycheck was coming from, or if she was going to suddenly find herself without enough money for the rent. For years they'd been so careful with their finances as they saved to buy a place of their own and bring about that next level of security in their relationship. That was until she discovered Dan securely in their bed with another woman. Determined not to waste any more time planning for the future, she'd decided to take the plunge and use all her savings to try and buy just one more. And she'd done it. Her father's previous redundancy had happened before she'd started university, after he'd been working at the same place, a large warehouse-type shop selling animal food, for years. They'd all assumed he'd stay there until he hit retirement age, and perhaps carry on a little beyond that too, as long as his knees and back withstood carrying the heavy bags. Although retirement was still another 10 years away for Arthur Berry, Holly couldn't help but wonder what chance he'd have of getting a new position at his age. "How is he?" she asked, remembering the deep grey clouds that settled over him the last time it had happened. He would force himself to smile and act like nothing was wrong whenever she was around, but when he didn't know she was watching, she could see the heartbreak in his eyes. The thought of him suffering like that again was like a lead weight in the pit of her stomach. "To be honest, love," Wendy continued, "he knew it was coming. I think we both did. And he's not the only one to suffer. They've let go half the staff." It was little comfort, knowing that he was not alone. "Why?" Holly asked. "What happened?" "Oh, you know what it's like today. Why have a human do a job when you can use some fancy machine that can go 4 times faster and doesn't need any rest or holidays? And the business has been under a lot of financial stress." The anger that Holly felt merged with guilt. She could see the sense in it from a business point of view, especially if they were struggling to keep afloat, but surely a company had to sometimes look beyond simple profit and focus on the people they employed. People like her father who had been loyal to them for over a decade. She drew in a lungful of air and tried to be more upbeat. "How can I help?" she asked. "Dad's got loads of experience, and local people know how hard he works. If you need any money just to see you by, I'm sure I can find some. Christmas was really strong at the shop. If you want—" No, dear," Wendy cut across her. "We'll be all right, honestly. I've still got my cleaning jobs, and your dad will get a small redundancy payout. He's been there a while, and it's really not that long until his pension kicks in either. The doctor's been on about him taking early retirement with his knee playing up and everything. Besides, we've been tucking a little away for a rainy day, which I suppose we can safely say this is. No, we'll be okay for money." "And he'll be okay?" Given the speech Wendy had just made about their finances, Holly was expecting a quick and positive yes, but instead silence lingered on the other end of the line again. "It's not the money I'm worried about. It's your father. What's going on in his head? He'd hate me telling you this, darling, but he's feeling really down. It happened last Thursday, and I thought that perhaps with the weekend and everything, he might brighten up a bit, see the silver lining in it all. But he's barely left the sofa. He feels like he's got no purpose, see, like he's too old to be useful anymore." This was enough to make Holly's heart ache. Her father was one of the mildest, most genuine people it was possible to meet. To have him giving up hope like this was gut-wrenching. "Could he volunteer somewhere, perhaps?" she said, voicing the thought as soon as it entered her mind. "I'm sure they could do with some help at the Willows care home. Maybe filling his time that way might do him good. Or there's an animal shelter near you, isn't there? I know he's not much of a dog person, but if he took on some of the walking, he'd probably grow into it after a while, and being outside would be better than shutting himself away indoors. Actually, Wendy cleared her throat. I was wondering if you might offer him some work? Me? Holly said, not doing a good job of disguising the surprise in her voice. It wouldn't have to be much, Wendy added hastily. Just a couple of days a week or a few hours here and there. Holly scratched her head, trying to make sense of what she was hearing. Take on her dad. The thought had never even crossed her mind. But then why would it have? He'd been happily employed, and she had all the staff she needed. You want me to hire Dad? Well, pretend to. You wouldn't have to be out of pocket. I could give you the money from my cleaning jobs, and you could pay him with that. So it wouldn't affect your profits or anything. He just needs to feel useful. I know it's a lot to ask. In fact, I shouldn't have. I'm sorry, forget it. I was just thinking out loud, that's all. I'm sorry, darling, I'll let you go. Pretend to employ him? No, even Holly could see that was a disaster waiting to happen. But she couldn't blame her mum for trying to think of anything that might help. The last thing either of them wanted was for her dad to slip into the type of decline she remembered from her teens. Just give me a minute to think about this, she said, going through the rota in her mind. Caroline was her most regular helper now, even covering some weekends with Dre so that she could have some time off with Ben. That said, Dre was in her second term in her last year at school and would be off to university in September. She had already gone down to 1 day so that she could concentrate on her studies. Also, Caroline preferred to work weekdays so she could spend time with her husband and children. Plus, it wouldn't be long until the Easter stock came in, and pricing that up was a massive job. So maybe she could make use of him at weekends, although he'd need to get up to speed pretty quickly. Okay, she said. Sorry? Wendy replied. I said okay. I'll take him on just for a few hours, though. That's all I need. It'll be mostly weekend work, but he'll have to come in on a weekday first when it's quiet enough for me to train him up. Maybe 4 hours on Wednesday or Thursday? I'm not exactly sure which yet. Then, once he's got the hang of things, I can move him to Saturdays and Sundays. Oh, Holly, darling! Her mother's voice came through in a rush. You don't know what this means to me. To him. To both of us. And I'll be paying him, she added firmly. He'll be doing proper work, so he'll earn his money. I'll put him on the same rate as Caroline. It's not much above minimum wage, I'm afraid. Would that be okay? Holly, love, that would be wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. Wendy paused, and Holly could have sworn she heard sniffing. Right, I'd better go, Holly said, grabbing yet another chocolate lime and thinking how a soak in the tub and a glass of white wine would be the perfect complement to the Moorish sweets. I've got a couple of things to do. Of course. Thank you, love. Oh, and just one more thing. Yes? You won't let your dad know I put you up to this, will you? He won't do it if he thinks it's charity. It'll need to come from you. Holly realised she should have seen this one coming. It's fine, Mum. I'll make sure he doesn't find out. Maybe you could come over later in the week, make out how stretched you are, etc. And don't let him know that I told you about him losing his job, or he'll see straight through it. You'll have to wait for him to bring it up and look shocked. In fact, if you come around before 5 one day when he'd normally be at work, then that would look really convincing. A headache was blooming behind Holly's temples. This was suddenly feeling like a lot more than just giving her dad a few hours' work. Okay, I'll text you later in the week. I'll have to check what days the others are in. Thanks again, Holly. Love you to the moon and back. Love you too, Mum. She ended the call and let out a long sigh. Working with her dad. What would that be like, she wondered, dropping a handful of sweet wrappers in the bin. He was easygoing and very relaxed, so it might actually be quite nice. He'd always been the one to calm her worries as a teenager, a man of rationality and logic, and someone you could sit with for hours in companionable silence, unlike Wendy. This might even be a blessing in disguise. Since she'd moved back to Bourton, she'd felt guilty about not spending enough time with her parents. Just rushed dinners here and there, and occasional afternoons when she and her mum would grab a cup of tea. It had all felt very fleeting. This would definitely solve that problem. After thinking through their conversation a little longer, she texted Ben to see how things were going next door with Toby. A minute passed and the two little ticks remained grey, signalling the message had not been opened. Ben was not one to have his phone tied to him the whole time, and with Toby over it was probably in another room. It could easily be ages before he saw it. Luckily, she knew exactly how she was going to spend that time. One great thing about Jamie's house was that it had 2 baths. Jamie's bedroom had an ensuite, which meant that the family bathroom was Holly's. And for someone who had a great affinity for soaking in the tub and needed plenty of space to store all her lotions and potions, this was perfect. Armed with a glass of wine and the bag of sweets, she headed upstairs and plucked a towel off the radiator in her room. Then, with arms loaded, she opened the bathroom door with her elbow. The first thing that hit her was a wall of steam. Stifling hot, it whooshed out through the open door, slowly clearing to reveal a man with a hand towel over his head, vigorously rubbing his hair and totally oblivious to Holly's presence. At least she assumed he was, because as the last of the steam dissipated, it became patently obvious that he was also naked. Chapter 4. Holly needed to turn around. She wanted to turn around, and yet she seemed to be shocked into paralysis, her feet refusing to move and her eyes locked on the dripping figure in front of her. Around his neck hung a leather cord with a wooden pendant attached, and she tried to focus her attention on that. But it was more than a little difficult given everything else that was on display. The muscles to start with, then the perfectly toned chest that led down to chiselled abs that glistened with water droplets that trickled further south. "Oh my God," Holly said, realising where her eyes were heading and finally finding her voice. She stammered. The man looked up, removing the towel from his head, and his hair fell in loose curls to just below his shoulders. He seemed surprisingly at ease with her presence there. "Hey, you must be Holly," he said in a soft American accent. "Finn, friend of Jamie's. Glad to finally meet you. Let me grab a bigger towel and I'll shake your hand." Yes, of course, very good," she said, her voice the very essence of British prim and properness as she turned her back on him. "Ah." He cleared his throat awkwardly and she glanced back. "Turns out I left my other towel in Jamie's room. Sorry, you don't mind if I squeeze past, do you?" Squeeze?" He indicated that she was blocking the door. "Oh my goodness," she cried and let out a shrill laugh. "A towel? Yes, I'll just get out your way." And with that she scurried back to her room, slammed the door behind her, and flopped down on the bed with a gasp. What the hell had just happened? Had she imagined it? No, there was no way she could have dreamt up that little scene. However she'd expected her evening to go, seeing an undeniably attractive man buck naked in her bathroom was a long way down the list of possibilities. A minute later, there was a knock on her door. "Hey," Jamie said, poking her head in and pulling a grimace. "So, you met Finn then?" "Yep, I definitely met Finn," Holly replied with a tight smile, not quite able to meet her friend's eyes. "Yeah, he said you just got a full frontal. Sorry about that. We're in kind of a rush, and I needed to shave my legs. Didn't really want him to see that, if you get what I mean." While Jamie was definitely talking to her, Holly hadn't yet recovered to the point where she could comprehend speech at quite the normal pace. A few moments later, and she got there. "So things are still on with you and Finn?" "Actually, Finley is my boyfriend now." "Wow." The shock that Holly had just received in the bathroom was partially eclipsed by the fact that her friend had just used the B word. Stepping into the room, Jamie gave her a knowing grin. "I know. Crazy, right?" "That happened fast," was the only thing Holly could think of to say. Any reference to Finn's obvious physical qualities didn't seem quite appropriate. "You're one to talk. You realise this is the first time you've been home this week?" "It is not," she replied indignantly. "Ben and I were over on Wednesday to play Monopoly, remember? And where was Finley then? You didn't think to mention it to us?" "It just didn't come up. Besides, that doesn't count. You were here with Ben. Which begs the question, why aren't you with him now? I thought it was a given that you'd moved in next door. I didn't think you two could be separated out of working hours." "Of course we can. And I've not moved in," Holly said, feeling a twist of guilt. She really needed to spend more time back here. Although, by the way this Finn guy was making himself at home in her bathroom, it looked like they'd been enjoying the privacy. Still, she kept that comment to herself. "Toby turned up," she said. "You know, Ben's nephew? He wanted to speak to him about something. Anyway, I don't want to talk about me, I want to talk about you. Tell me everything. What does he do? Where's he from? American, right?" "Near California," she grinned, in a way Holly had never seen her do before, her cheeks rosy rounds and her entire face aglow. Jamie had been on plenty of dates. Half the guys in Bourton wanted to impress her, but no one had got to the stage where she'd referred to them as her boyfriend. "Wow. I guess he must be pretty special," she said. For some reason, although she'd said the words, she felt reticent. It was the way Jamie was beaming that unnerved her, she realised. Sure, it was brilliant that she'd found someone, but she'd like to know a bit more about him before she enthused. It was obvious that Jamie had fallen hook, line and sinker for a man that wasn't even from the same country as her. The last thing Holly wanted was for her to get her heart broken. "Yes, he's great. I think you'll really like him when you get to know him. It would be good if you could see more of him." "Oh, I've seen plenty of him," Holly muttered. "Maybe we can arrange a double date or a triple even, with Michael and Caroline when we get back." "Get back? Are you going somewhere?" Holly asked, wondering how she could ever look him in the eye again, let alone sit down to dinner with him. Jamie looked at her watch. "We are, and we should get moving. Our flight leaves at 9:40. And you know what it's like checking in now. Everything takes ages." Holly had expected her to say they were going to the pub or the cinema, or if they were being incredibly adventurous, somewhere like Bristol or Bath. But catching a plane. Flight? With another quick look at her watch, Jamie glanced over her shoulder before stepping further into the room and closing the door. "Okay, but you can't say anything to Finn. I've booked us 3 nights in Amsterdam. I've got a couple of days between jobs and he's not working at the minute. I saw a good deal and thought, why not? He doesn't know where we're going yet. I've just told him to pack a few things and some comfy shoes. We're going on a walking tour, and it's crazy long." Holly took a moment to digest what had been said. "You're going on holiday together?" "I know. He's going to love it, right?" She looked so happy, but Holly was having a hard time reciprocating. Going on holiday could be an enormous expense, as she knew from all those years with Dan when they'd stayed at home for fear of eating into their savings. And here was Jamie saying Finn wasn't even working. "Have you paid for it all?" she asked her. "Well, as I said, he doesn't know about it, and you can't exactly ask someone to pay if you're going to surprise them, can you? Besides, he'll cover more than his fair share when we're there. He's like that." Wow. This was the only word she could conjure up.